Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. My guest today is Daniel Kemmis. Daniel is a former Montana state legislator and Missoula, Montana mayor. Daniel came to my attention back in the late 90s and early 2000s because he was talking about things that I was interested in, which was community and how local communities function and how what leadership in local communities and organizations in local communities can do to create a better environment for the people of a local community. When I began my consulting practice in 1995, my goal was to encourage and equip local people to care for their communities in a way that made a difference that matters. So Daniel was doing that as the mayor and as a politician in the state of Montana, and I became impressed with him. He has written a number of books. Community and the Politics of Place was his first one. The Good City and the Good Life, the second one, and the one that caught my attention is called "This Sovereign Land: A New Vision for Governing the West." And in this book, he talks about the need for the relationship between the federal government and local states and local communities to change and to allow for greater opportunities for leadership by local people and local states. Whether that happened or not, that's another story. And then more recently, as we've gone through the last uh, 20 years or so, Daniel has been talking about citizenship and democracy and many of the themes that many people have. And he's written a book called Citizens Uniting to Restore our Democracy. It came in the wake of the Citizens United Supreme Court decision. So I just wanted you to have a little sense of that, and I'm going to give you a little 6.5 minute video of him speaking 10 years ago. Um, and I think it captures who he is and the person I appreciate. And so that sets up our conversation so that you have some background so that you're not sitting there wondering, oh, what are they talking about and what's going on here? So enjoy our conversation together.
The first trajectory is a series of wounds and diseases that have afflicted our body politic, leaving it very often gridlocked and widely distrusted, if not openly despised. The kinds of wounds and diseases that I'm talking about, you're all familiar with. One of them is the vastly expanded role of money, especially big money, in our political system. Another one is the gridlock that so often arises from an increase in the role of partisanship in our governing institutions. And behind that gridlock is what appears to be a deepening polarization within the electorate itself and an inability to reach across those ideological lines, an unwillingness very often to transcend those differences in order to solve the obviously very serious problems that we face as a people. We seem to have come to a place where our governing institutions are almost totally incapable of dealing with any of the major problems that we face. And regardless of where people find themselves on the political spectrum with regard to the coming election, I think very few of us have a very high level of hopefulness that after the election we're going to be in much better shape, regardless of how it goes, in terms of our ability to govern ourselves. Well, there's a cheerful picture. So how about the other trajectory? The other one, much less widely noticed, has been the spread, the deepening, the proliferation of collaborative efforts in which people have slowly but surely over the last 20 to 30 years taught themselves and taught one another to reach beyond those ideological divisions, to transcend self-interest, not to put it aside, but to transcend it, and to deal with real problems in real places, and to come up with solutions that have a prospect of working and of lasting. So my chief objective tonight is this: to persuade at least a few of you that collaborative work is, above all, an exercise in democracy. And then further, I want to suggest that the skills and practices that so many of you have developed in the course of learning how to collaborate are the skills and practices that are indispensable to a healthy, functioning democracy. And once I've made that case and hopefully persuaded some of you, I want to invite at least a handful of you to consider whether, and if so, how, you might bring those democratic skills and practices that you have developed in collaborative settings, how you might bring those skills to bear on the great challenge of healing our democracy.
Oh,
Daniel, how are you?
pretty well, thanks. What about you?
I'm doing great. I get to see you and get to talk with you today.
Good.
So glad to see you're still alive and around. And uh, I picked up your book.
Oh, yes.
I'm sure you've gotten a lot of good thoughts about that.
Well, it has sort of had a life of its own. So um, it it has. I have tried to keep its main themes alive in various ways.
Yeah.
but I'm glad to hear that um, you're still pursuing thoughts that you had written down some time ago. So I'm eager to visit with you about that.
Well, I'll just say this that these two books were very influential in my thinking, particularly the Sovereign Land,
Hmm.
because and I met you in 2004. Came to your office there by the river,
Oh, yes.
and what made me want to meet you then was this idea of that the people of the Western states, the citizens of the Western states, had the capacity to govern themselves,
Mhm.
and and that I think that was a rather controversial position to take back then, wasn't it?
Oh, yes, it was. And, and still is probably more controversial now than it was then.
I agree with you. I agree with you. Um, I spent 6 years living in Jackson Hole, and I would say the overwhelming perspective of the people there is that we should let the federal government run everything.
Yes.
And because they don't trust their neighbors. But that's not
Well,
true.
of course, Jackson Hole has always been a kind of island within Wyoming,
Very
uh,
true.
uh, in somewhat the same way that Missoula has been an island within Montana, although I would say it's more extreme in the case of Jackson Hole.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right about that. And um, my 6 years there um, were great. And but when COVID came about, a lot of people left, like me, and a lot of people from California moved in, and they have a different way of seeing things.
Yes, right.
So
Yeah, COVID moved people around a good deal and moved a lot of people into the mountains who might never have come here otherwise. So it was a fairly substantial migration. Um, in the case of Montana, it's been exacerbated by the TV series Yellowstone. Um,
yeah,
that that a lot of people have thought, oh, I could live in that series. Just move to Montana.
I never watched it
I haven't either.
because I know it's not accurate.
Yes.
And when I was in Wyoming, I did a lot of. I'm a retired Presbyterian minister, and I did a lot of service to churches in Wyoming, and um, consulting and helping them kind of make leadership decisions, things like that. But I came to have a real grasp of the entirety of the state. I covered
Hmm.
the whole state, and it's a wonderful place. And it really, I mean, you're right. Jackson is an island, in the midst of the sea of Wyoming. So it's quite interesting.
I came to appreciate Wyoming in a different way when I served for several years on the board of the Ruckelshaus Institute, at, which was based in Laramie, but it had a board made up of many of the senior figures from Wyoming politics and culture. And so that was a real joy to get to um, know the state in that way and to know the different communities in the state.
It's a very diverse state, and I don't think anybody would ever have thought that.
Hmm.
But that's what I've discovered. And it's really diverse because of so many of these communities are defined by the families that are there.
Yes, right, right.
And and that's what outsiders don't like is that the families kind of run the town and as they have for generations. And
Yes,
and and they I think the political dynamic that is going on today is quite interesting. I'm nonpartisan and I'm apolitical in taking sides. Um, so I just say that up front, but because I watch all of this and I've spent a lot of time with people talking with people in Europe, and they don't understand us. And I live now in North Carolina, and I would say the people in the East don't understand the West, and as a result, we um, have a difficult time dealing with democracy
yes,
because the way I see it is that there's a lack of trust that exists in the populace that really harms our ability to govern ourselves.
I agree. And to me, one of the real regrets about um, the last 10 or 15 years has been the way that the communal bonds that have held people together have kind of paled in the glaring light of social media and other forces. So even though in many ways those communal bonds continue to exist on the ground, um, yet in terms of political salience, they seem to have faded um, in the bright glare of social media and
Yeah.
other forces. Uh, it's it's unfortunate because I think those communal bonds are in many ways the essence of a democratic society. Um,
Do you I have it here somewhere. Do you remember Peter Berger's book on mediating institutions? You know Peter Berger, the sociologist?
yes, I was familiar with his work.
Yes, hold on. I think it's called To Empower People. Yeah, To Empower People from,
uh,
from State to Civil Society. And I find it, I read that 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And I thought it made sense then. But I think we've kind of lost that capacity for mediating institutions like local communities, um, YMCAs and churches and um, garden clubs, things like that, which were contributed to local communities' health and welfare. I think they're more difficult to sustain these days.
I think I think that's true. I guess the optimist in me um, still looks around me in my local community here in Missoula and sees many examples of people continuing not only to sustain um, social communal entities, but to create new ones. So, um, so I don't feel like the life has gone out of that altogether. Um, to me, the bigger problem is that there isn't the connection between that deep communal life and what people think of as politics. It's as if they exist in two different realms.
Yes.
And politics ends up weaker as a result.
How do you explain um, that shift or that transition to where we are? Do you have I mean, you've written about all this, but so I know it's in your mind, but how do you explain that?
Well, I'm not sure what all goes into it. One thing um, seems to be that social media has been so adept at um, at separating people out from each other into the groupings um, that um, the platforms can benefit from, and so there's been a steady increase in tribalism um, because people sort themselves out on the algorithms. Um, and
I,
then, and so then you get what somebody called the filter bubble that people only know people in their own bubble and assume that's the whole world. Again, I think that's where a rich communal life is important because it it brings people together outside of those bubbles. Um, but it's become more and more difficult um, to attract people away from their screens and from their tribes.
Yes, I see that. I'm intentional in my trying to develop relationships with the Gen Z generation, because I feel like our generation has placed a burden on them, because we created the world that they exist in, and and it doesn't make sense to them. And that's what they're telling me. It doesn't make sense. And then we become very critical of them because they're just spending all their time scrolling, or they're living in their mother's basement, or we have all these explanations for why we are disappointed in them, but we don't actually talk with them. And what I have found is that um, they they feel like they've been given a lot of answers, but never were allowed to ask the questions which would produce those answers.
Hmm, interesting.
So the question is to them is, so what is it you want to know? What is the and they're not even sure what questions they should be asking. So I see they're kind of in this state of limbo. But at the same time, they're very interested in communication and connection with people and talking with people, um, and so I think that I think they have a different approach to the social media than, say, millennials or Gen Xers do, and it gives me a greater sense of hope for the future because of what I see in my conversations with him.
Well, you're reminding me of a conversation I had um, just last week. My soon to be 20-year-old grandson just um, came back to Montana for a few weeks from the East Coast, and he had just finished his first year of college. And I found him to be hungry for meaningful conversation with um, an old man like me. But I think you're right, Ed, that in many of the Gen Z people that there's a hunger for connection, for intellectual stimulation, and so on, that that their electronic world is not satisfying. So, to me, one of the challenges is how we can um, engage them in any aspects of a rich communal life where they actually come face to face with one another and with other generations.
Yes, I agree with you, and I have I have a plan.
Oh,
Um,
good.
this what we're doing on my this is the Eddie Network podcast, and for all of you who are watching, this is Daniel Kemmis, who served in the Montana Legislature and was the mayor of Missoula, and is an author and a person that I have followed for a long time and have a great respect. So never did introduce you, but what this is an unscripted conversation, meaning we can talk about whatever we want, and I have that with these young people. And so I have been encouraged by some of my friends that I should do these as a live event. So at some point this fall, I'm going to put together an event for college students where we do a conversation like this without an agenda, and that, and I'll just invite, there will be a crowd there, and I'll invite someone up, and well, I will just start, well, who are you, and what are you studying, or what are you interested in, and that is the where a meaningful conversation between two people from widely different generations can actually have something meaningful and rather deep conversation can result.
That sounds good. I wish you well with that.
Well, thank you. It's been something I've been thinking about for a couple of years, but it's now time to do it. And what I find is that when we are able to talk like this, that this is the sort of conversation that we would have, if I ran into you in Missoula, at a coffee shop or at the barber shop or someplace, this is the kind of conversation we might have. And it's very normal. And it comes without any feeling of oh, what's his point? Well, it's really just very relaxed, and we can talk about whatever we want to talk about.
Yes, right. Well, for some reason, as you were describing that, it reminded me of a phenomenon that has troubled me a little bit. I live near the river here in Missoula and can readily go out and walk on one of the trails along the river or to the downtown. And in recent years, I have found that when I encounter someone on the trail, when there's no one else near, that more and more often I need to make an effort um, to have the other person acknowledge my presence. There are more and more people that I meet who seem to want to be in isolation, and it creates an eerie feeling for me because here we are um, inhabiting a world together, and the least we could do is acknowledge one another's presence.
Yes.
Um, and and yet it seems to me that various forces have pushed us apart to the point where it takes a deliberate effort to establish what to me would be a normal human connection.
Yes, I agree with you, and I think it's a product of some of the well, I think it's partly social media, but it's also, I think that many of the political people in the world today are intentionally driving a wedge between people because that's the way they are able to promote their particular perspective. And
Yes, that is all too true. I I still have a certain amount of faith in democratic, with a small d, democratic politics. I think politics are crucial to human thriving, but politics are also subject to so many forms of manipulation and corruption. And the one you mention is near the top of the list. It is so useful in the political sphere to develop and foster and feed antagonisms among people. Um,
Yes.
and and so that gets done. And as we mentioned earlier, social media just lends itself to that dynamic.
Yes, it does. And but at the same time, I um, I don't think things are sustainable as they are, and people will look for something. They'll look for an alternative. Younger people will look for an alternative, and I and I think that's a well, it's a healthy thing for one, but I think it's happening, and it's what I see happening. Because if you look at the polling numbers, the traditional parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, are not doing well, and
Right.
and the question is, what did you do to alienate the population? And I'm not going to speculate on that because I'm not involved with that. But that's what I assume is that they've created this, they've, sort of created the circumstances of their own demise.
I think that's definitely the case. And in some ways, the two main political parties have collaborated
Yes.
in that dynamic. They'll rarely acknowledge that that's what they've done, but in many ways, it's the case. Um, I'll be a political scientist here for a second and just mention the Electoral College, which is in many ways deeply undemocratic, again with a small d. It it guarantees that the Republicans in California never have a say in a presidential election.
That's right.
And Democrats in Texas have been in the same position. Um, there's actually no reason that the Electoral College should operate the way it does. That is, giving all of a state's electoral votes to whoever gets the most votes in that state. Um, any state could actually change that and do proportional representation in the electoral college. But the reason no state does is because the parties benefit so much
Yeah.
from this perverse system that we now have in place. Well, that's just one example of how it is that parties uh, work against the interests of the people.
That is why I left the Democrat Party back in 1994. I
Hmm.
saw that happening. I didn't become a Republican. I just became a non-aligned voter. But I saw that, and nothing's changed. And you know, and we can point to the collaboration between the parties in President Clinton and uh, head of the House Newt Gingrich, you know, collaborating on the budget, and you know, it was, if you recall, you know, they were very much aligned together on that. So I think the challenge, I think, let me put it this way. I believe that all these things are cyclical, and we're in a cycle where the decline is obvious, but at some point we'll see a revival or a renewal or a restoration, whatever the term is, that will bring people back into wanting to be participants in the political process.
Well, I hope you're right. Once again, I think um, the experience that people have within their own local communities will be a key in that revitalization.
I think it starts at the local level. I agree. And you know, I moved when I left Wyoming. I moved back to North Carolina. I moved into a small town of about 7,500 residents. And during my first weeks there, I met the mayor, and he had been the mayor for, I think, 3 terms, and before that, he had been a city councilman for 5 terms. So he was certainly in our generation. And he was mayor. And I asked questions like I'm asking you, and I said, "So tell me, what is the most difficult challenge of being the mayor of this town?" And he said, and I laugh about this. He said, "People driving too fast on Sixth Street." And I thought, well, here's a guy who likes it the way it's always been, and it's always going to be that way as long as he's mayor.
Yes, right.
And he put speed bumps on Sixth Street. That was his big effort as mayor that term. So, and I've told that story to many people, and they all laugh just like you do. And so but I think that's why I believe that at some point people will decide we want something different, and in order to make that happen, we're going to have to run for office.
That's one thing that continues to give me hope is how many people, especially younger people, are willing to run for office and to put up with the sometimes nasty environment that they encounter there, um, simply out of a commitment to the common good. So the fact that so many people continue to step up and to step forward is a very encouraging sign.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you, and it's it's an interesting time to be alive, and I've interviewed a lot of different people, and I spent a part of a day with an academic down in Utah whose specialty is civilization collapse,
Hmm.
and And I thought, the first time I heard him speak, I thought, well, that makes sense. His his position was that collapse is a rapid simplification of an overly complex system.
Hmm.
And he told me that there's been no civilization in human history that voluntarily simplified their life.
Uh,
And so everything
that's
gets more and more complex, and therefore it hits a point where that complexity um, brings about a collapse. What do you think
it's
of that?
well, it's an interesting observation. Um, I don't think I have thought of it in exactly those terms. The It has seemed to me that the evolution of the universe has generally been in the direction of greater complexity, and that our species is testimony to that,
Mhm.
that our brains in particular are phenomenally complex organs, and it's
Yes.
their complexity that has enabled our species to become so dominant. Now, of course, we're on the cusp of another leap in that direction with the extension of artificial intelligence. And we'll see what comes of that when we talk about younger generations. I find myself feeling that it, it's their world that will be dominated by artificial intelligence. And it will be up to them to decide what to make of it. My generation um, has almost nothing to say about those developments,
Yeah.
and the most we can do is to offer whatever guidance and encouragement we can to younger generations to help enable them to deal with some of the big problems they will be facing. So I I find myself looking at my grandchildren and wondering how capable their generations will be in governing themselves in the face of some some remarkable challenges. I
Yeah.
feel an obligation to do whatever little I can to help them develop their small d democratic potential.
I agree with you. And what I see is that they will not see this AI revolution as revolutionary. They'll just see it as the way things are. Much like, in our generation, we saw the broadcast television, the news, as just the way things are. When our own grandparents would have been startled by what, you know, like the coverage of the Kennedy assassination on that weekend in November of 1963, we saw that and that we just absorbed that. Okay, we're watching this film. I remember on Sunday morning watching Lee Harvey Oswald get shot by Jack Ruby. I saw that. I mean, here I am, a 10-year-old, and I'm watching a man be killed right before my eyes on TV,
Yes,
and it didn't faze me, but it would have fazed my grandparents.
yes, for sure. No, I think you're right to point out and for us to bear in mind um, that our grandchildren are not the first generation to live in effect a brand new world.
Yeah.
So that's a helpful reminder. Thank you, Ed.
Well, I do see time as having a continuity from the past through the present into the future, and that it's it's something that if we can accept that, then we see that your grandparents, my grandparents contributed something to us that we're passing on to our children and our grandchildren and our great grandchildren.
Yes, indeed.
So, uh, so do I see that you have a sense of hope about the future?
Well, I do. I think I have always carried a strain of optimism. I've sometimes described myself as a congenital optimist. To a certain extent, I can't help it. And so, whenever I look at a situation, my default is to find rays of hope and optimism within it. Um, so when I look around me in my own community, when you and I are done talking here, I'll take a walk down the river and go to uh, a weekly event called Out to Lunch at Kemmis Park, and I'll see several hundred people there enjoying good music, good food, good conversation. It's something that Missoula created about 40 years ago and has kept going summer after summer. Um, these things don't just happen by accident, they happen because people care about their communities and they bring to bring to bear their own intelligence about how to make things better.
Yes.
And they keep doing that week after week, year after year. And so it's that kind of thing that gives me hope. Um, and um, and I'm glad it does.
Well, I'm grateful for the time we've had. I have a high respect for you and the work that you've done, and I think you've made a difference that matters not only in your community and your state, but across the country. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast was just to be able to acknowledge that and to say thank you for your service to the country and to your community.
Well, thank you And I appreciate that very much, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. So keep keep on keeping on. All right.
Well, when I saw you in 2004, I was on a 15-day trip to cover as much of the Lewis and Clark Trail as I could, with plans to write a book on the leadership of Lewis and Clark. And I never got that done, but that folder is still sitting in my computer. And so my goal is to write that book and have it published by maybe by at least 10 years from now, but so that it'll be there for the 250th anniversary of the core discovery.
Well, good. I'll keep my eyes open for that book.
I hope I hope I'll finish it in time, and it means I will have to come back out there and cover the trail all over again, and when I do come, I'll let you know, and we'll come and we'll go to lunch together.
Good, good. You're on.
Thank you, and thank you all for watching the Eddie Network podcast, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.